Most of us can feel that something isn't working. We have more information than ever, more experts, and more urgency, and yet the same crises keep repeating: environmental, social, economic, and democratic. This isn't because people don't care, and it's not because the right solution hasn't been found. It's because the systems we rely on are designed to think short term. They optimize for speed, efficiency, and intent, but they don't carry responsibility over time. And that's what this free mini training is about. It's called Why the Current System is Failing and Why a Different Approach is Necessary. This is not advocacy, it's not political, and it's not about persuading you to agree with me. It's about system design. In this training, we look at why well-intentioned reforms keep failing, how siloed decision-making externalizes harm, why accountability disappears over time, and why urgency often makes problems worse. You don't need prior knowledge, and you don't need to agree with everything you hear. You just need a willingness to look at structure rather than people. I've also included simple one-page references, not instructions, not solutions, but lenses that you can use to think more clearly about what's happening around you. If you've ever felt like we're repeating the same mistakes faster, this training is designed to give you clarity, not answers. It's free, it's public, and it's available now if you want to explore further. Most of us can feel that something isn't working. We have more data, more urgency, and more experts than ever, yet the same crises keep repeating. This isn't because people don't care, and it isn't because the right solution hasn't been found. It's because the systems we rely on are designed to think short term. I've created a free mini training called Why the Current System is Failing and Why a Different Approach is Necessary. It is not advocacy, it's not political. It's about understanding system design without blame or shortcuts. If you want clarity instead of arguments, you can watch it for free. This free mini training is called Why the Current System is Failing and Why a Different Approach is Necessary. Before we begin, I want to be clear about what it is and what it is not. This is not about blame, it's not about ideology, and it's not about persuading you to agree with me. This training looks at system design, how decisions are structured, how accountability works over time, and why the same failures keep repeating even when intentions are good. You don't need prior knowledge, and you don't need to agree with everything you hear. The only thing I ask is that you stay curious about structure rather than people. So let's begin. I want to thank you for being here. I want to start by saying something clearly because it matters for how you listen to everything that follows. This session is not about blame, and it's not about ideology, and it's not about convincing you to agree with me. This is one moment, not a lecture. Before we talk about solutions, I want to show you something very simple. It is not about bad people or bad intentions. This is what systems do when accountability is missing. Most of what we're living through, climate collapse, institutional failure, social fragmentation, fits inside of this loop. I'm not going to walk through every step right now. I just want you to recognize it. The rest of the training is about why this loop keeps repeating even when people mean well. If you came here feeling frustrated, overwhelmed, or confused about why the world seems to be moving backwards despite so much effort, that reaction makes sense. For decades, we've been told that progress means moving faster. Faster decisions, faster growth, faster solutions. Speed were the answer, we wouldn't be facing overlapping ecological, economic, and democratic crises. This training isn't about blame. It's about understanding why systems designed to solve problems are often the ones creating them. Most people are not disengaged. Most people care deeply. And yet, despite decades of programs, policies, innovations, and well-intentioned action, we keep circling the same crisis. Climate, inequity, health, governance, trust. That tells us something important. The problem is not a lack of effort. The problem is not a lack of intelligence. And it is not a lack of good intentions. The problem is that we are trying to solve long-term interconnected system failures using short-term thinking and siloed solutions. And when systems are malaligned, even good actions can make things worse elsewhere. Today is not about fixing everything. It's about understanding why so many fixes fail, even when they come from the right place. I want to be clear about something else up front. You do not need to agree with everything I say. Then you do not need to share my politics, my background, or my worldview. The only thing I'm asking is that you stay curious long enough to take a look at the structure of the system itself, not the personalities inside it. Because we focus only on people, we fight each other. But when we look at the structure, patterns emerge. Over and over again, we see the same cycle. Urgency leads to speed. Speed leads to simplification. Simplification leads to unintended harm. And then we argue about intent instead of outcomes. Short-term wins feel satisfying. They're measurable. They're fundable. They're easy to communicate. But systems don't respond to intentions. They respond to structure. And when the structure rewards short-term thinking, punishes long-term responsibility. This session is about naming that pattern calmly, without shame and without pretending there's a single solution. We are going to talk about why the system keeps producing the outcome we say we don't want, and why simply trying harder inside the same structure won't change that. I'm not here to give you a list of answers today. I'm here to help you see the system clearly enough that the next step makes sense. So if at any point you feel discomfort, confusion, or resistance, that's not a problem. That's usually a sign that you're looking at the structure issues rather than the personal one. Let's begin there. This session is about why our systems keep producing the same failures regardless of who is in charge or what policies are chosen. We're not here to blame people or argue ideology. We're here to look at how systems are designed to think. Act 1, short-term thinking. Most modern institutions are optimized for the short term. Quarterly results, election cycles, annual budgets. These timelines reward speed and visibility and visible output, not long-term stability. The problem isn't that leaders don't care. The problem is that systems reward the wrong kind of success. So I'd like to introduce the short-term versus long-term logic. Short-term systems optimize for urgency. Long-term systems optimize for continuity. And most of our institutions were never designed to think beyond the present generation. And why good intentions don't change outcomes. And how election cycles, quarterly profits, grant timelines, and media cycles all reward speed over sustainability. Why urgency feels moral makes things worse. Before we go any further, I want to show you one simple diagram. This is not a control system. It's not an approval process, and it's not something you need to memorize. This diagram exists for one reason only: to make responsibility visible without concentrating power. This is called the GGDI, Relational Accountability Loop. It shows how responsibility moves through the system over time, not how authority moves. Nothing here gives permission. Nothing here takes control. And nothing here removes responsibility from the people doing the work. If you're looking at this and thinking this feels circular instead of hierarchical, that's intentional. Real systems don't move in straight lines. They evolve, they adapt, and return to earlier decisions with new information. Let me walk you through this once very slowly. Everything starts with access. The standards, system layers, definitions, and evidence are public. There's no gatekeeping at the door. From there, programs or organizations declare their alignment and scope. They say, this is what we're strengthening. This is what is outside our scope. That honesty is more important than claiming perfection. Then there is independent oversight. Oversight doesn't judge intent or ideology. It looks at clarity, realistic scope, and accountability using a documented process. Those decisions are then documented transparently, not to shame anyone, not to freeze decisions in time, but so reasoning is traceable and learning can accumulate. Next is learning and responsibility. This is important. Responsibility never leaves the actor. GGDI does not own outcomes. Partners don't outsource accountability. Learning informs future decisions. And finally, there's re-entry and adaptation. As programs evolve or context changes, alignment can be updated. The loop begins again. And I want to be very clear about what this is not. This is not enforcement. This is not compliance policing, and it's not approval seeking. It's a shared structure that allows people to act responsibly without being controlled and without pretending impacts don't exist. This loop exists because most of the harm in the world doesn't come from bad intent. It comes from unclear scope, owned responsibility and decisions that can't be revisited. This loop fixes that quietly. You don't need to remember every word on the diagram. What matters is this: access is open, alignment is declared, and oversight is independent, as well as responsibility stays where it belongs. Everything else we cover builds on that. This loop shows how responsibility moves through the system without transferring control. At this point, you understand the structure. You understand how responsibility moves, then you can probably feel why this works where so many systems fail. What we haven't done yet is answer the harder question. How do you actually apply this in the real world, inside institutions, programs, funding decisions, and policies, without recreating the very systems that have caused the damage? And this is where most conversations stop. People either stay at theory or they jump straight to solutions without structure. Neither is enough. The free training that you are in right now is designed to give you shared language, shared standards, and a way to think systematically. The paid course is where we go deeper. In the paid course, we work through how to apply the 15 system layers in real decisions, and how to scope programs honestly without overclaiming impact, and how to design oversight that protects integrity without controlling people, and how to prevent responsibility from being displaced or diluted over time. We look at real-world examples, not to copy them, but to understand where systems quietly break down. What the paid course is not a toolkit, a certification, or a set of instructions. It is a way of learning to think and act responsibly inside complex systems, especially when there are trade-offs and no perfect answers. If you're someone who works in policy, education, funding, governance, or community leadership, or if you're building something you want to do without causing harm, the paid course may be useful to you. If not, everything you've learned here still stands on its own. This framework doesn't need everyone. It just needs people who are willing to be honest about scope, responsibility, and impact. If that's you, I'll see you in the next module. The paid course explores how to apply this framework in real-world context, where decisions, funding, and accountability matter. When one system layer is strengthened in isolation, pressure is transferred elsewhere. Up to this point, we've been talking about patterns, not causes, not villains, not solutions. We've named something that most people feel but rarely have language for. That despite effort, intelligence, and care, the outcomes keep repeating. This is usually the moment when people say, okay, but what's the fix? And this is where most conversations go wrong. Because before we talk about solutions, we have to understand why so many well-designed, well-funded, and well-intentioned solutions don't actually change the trajectory of the system. What tends to happen is this: we isolate the problem, we design a solution inside of that silo, we measure success based on the silo, and then we're surprised when pressure shows up somewhere else. That doesn't mean the solution was bad. It means the system was incomplete. Systems don't fail all at once. They fail quietly, by shifting stress from one area to another. In the next section, we're going to look at how siloed success actually works, and how fixing one thing in isolation can unintentionally weaken something else. And why this isn't a moral problem, it's a structural one. This is where we stop talking about effort and start talking about design. Act 2, Silos and Fragmentation. In this first part of the session, we named a pattern. We talked about how short-term thinking keeps showing up across very different issues: climate, health, education, governance, even when people are acting with care and urgency. Now I want to talk about why that pattern keeps repeating, because what usually happens next is that we start looking for better solutions, smarter programs, stronger leaders, or more funding. But before any of that can work, we need to understand something uncomfortable but essential. Systems don't fail because no one tried hard enough. They fail because success in one area can quietly create stress somewhere else. When we isolate problems, we also isolate responsibility. When we optimize one outcome, we often transfer costs to another system, usually one that's less visible or less powerful. That's how we end up celebrating progress while trust erodes, ecosystems degrade, and communities destabilize. This isn't hypocrisy. It's not corruption by default. It's what happens when complex systems are managed in silos. In this section, we're going to look at how siloed success works, why doing the right thing in isolation can still lead to harm, and why fixing outcomes requires us to look at structure, not just intent. We're not here to assign blame, we're here to understand design. When one system layer is strengthened in isolation, pressure is transferred elsewhere. Another major failure point is siloed thinking. Housing is treated separately from health, water is treated separately from education, finance is treated separately from democracy. But the real world doesn't work in silos. When systems are fragmented, harm doesn't disappear, it just moves. Act 3. Intent versus accountability. The question isn't, do we agree? It's, are we aligned with the system that sustain life? This is where intent becomes dangerous. When systems rely on good intentions instead of accountability, they stop tracking impact. Harm becomes accidental, responsibility becomes unclear, and because no one is clearly responsible, nothing changes. If systems fail in a loop, then they don't fail because people are bad, ignorant, or uncaring. They fail because accountability is missing from the design. Most systems are built to optimize for speed, efficiency, or intent. Very few are built to carry responsibility over time. So the question becomes, if failure repeats in a loop, what would a different loop look like? I want to be very clear about something. I'm not going to teach this loop in detail here. What I want you to see is that a different structure is possible. Instead of intent driving action, accountability is built into the system. And instead of control, responsibility is traceable. Instead of crisis response, learning feeds forward. This loop doesn't require agreement, it doesn't require enforcement, and it doesn't require centralized authority. It requires structure. Act 4, the failure loop. This existence of a structural framework that is grounded in the 15 interconnected system layers, that is governed and accountability built in, that is taught step by step in course number 1. There is a structured way to do this. The full framework is taught in one course. We go layer by layer. We slow this down properly. In this system failure loop diagram, this is the pattern we see over and over again. Short-term goals lead to fragmented decisions. Externalized harm creates crisis. Crisis justifies urgency, and urgency resets the cycle. This is not a failure of morality, it's a failure of a system design. And why hasn't this been fixed already? The answer is uncomfortable. Most fixes focus on what to do, not how responsibility is carried once something is done. Policies change, leadership changes, funding cycles change. But the underlying structure stays the same. So we keep seeing the same pattern. Well-intended action, followed by unintended harm, followed by blame, followed by urgency, followed by another short-term fix. And this is why arguments don't solve anything, and why debate often makes things worse. Without shared standards, declared scope, and accountability over time, even the best ideas degrade. And this is not a moral failure. It is a design failure. Act 5, the gap. I don't want you to leave this session feeling frustrated and no way to think differently. So I've included 2 one-page references with this training. The first is the relational accountability loop that you just saw. The second is a one-page overview of the 15 system layers, things like health, water, education, financing, governance, environment, and history. These are not instructions, they are lenses. You don't need authority to use them. You don't need to agree with every layer, and you don't need to fix everything. You can simply ask better questions, such as, where is accountability missing? And what impacts are being externalized? Which system layers are being stressed or ignored? And what is outside the declared scope? And who bears the cost? For many people, this will be the first time they've had language for what they've been sensing for years. And if what we've covered today resonates, the next step is learning the actual system, not just why things are broken, but how alignment, responsibility, and long-term thinking are designed and practiced. And that's what we do in course number 1. This free session is about understanding the problem clearly. The course is where we build the structure. You don't need to agree with everything I say, you just need to be willing to think beyond short-term fixes. You can simply ask better questions. Act 6, transition to paid course. This free training is about recognition. If it helped you see the pattern, then it has done its job. But recognition alone doesn't change how systems are governed. Understanding how accountability can be built into design that takes time, structure, and practice. That's what the full paid course is for. The course slows everything down and walks through how systems are designed to think, how accountability replaces intent, and how long-term stewardship really works. It's not advocacy, it's not a list of solutions, and it's not about convincing anyone. It's about understanding the system underneath the arguments. You don't need to take it, but if you're ready to move from recognition to understanding, it's there when you are. And this training is meant to help you see the pattern, but seeing the problem isn't the same as knowing how to fix it. In the full course, we slow down and build the system logic that long-term stewardship actually requires, layer by layer, without ideology and without shortcuts. If you're ready to move from recognition to understanding, that's where we go next. The free training gives people a shared system lens, the relational accountability loop, and the 15 system layers so that you can understand why failure keeps repeating. The paid work is where we learn how to govern differently. If this training helped you see the pattern, then it has done what it was meant to do. Understand why systems failed doesn't require agreement. It requires the willingness to look at structure rather than people. The tools you've been given here, the failure loop, the accountability lens, and the systems layer, are not instructions. They're ways of seeing. And you can use them to ask better questions, to notice what's been externalized, and to recognize where responsibility disappears over time. This is where many conversations stop, not because people don't care, but because understanding how systems actually work takes time and structure. That's what the full course is for. It doesn't offer solutions or positions. It builds systems literacy step by step. So accountability becomes something you can recognize and eventually practice. You don't need to take the next step, but if you're ready to move from recognition to understanding, it's there when you are. Thank you for taking the time to think more carefully about the systems we all live inside of.